Thanks for joining us, Rebecca. You started Canvas back in 2013, and you are one of the earliest female investors and GP in the venture world. Tell us about your journey of working with Casetext and how they are kind of growing during the AI boom.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, so Casetext was just announced yesterday that they were acquired by your company, Thomson Reuters, right? So yeah, Casetext was a company that I had gotten to know through the years, and they were actually a YC company, and then I looked at their Series A, and then came in on their Series B. And what Casetext does, maybe it's good to tell them a little bit about what they do. So what Casetext does is they actually serve the legal profession, and Casetext, with this new GPT-4 technology, actually sits in the role of an associate at a law firm and can do that work. And they can do it because they've been working with the legal profession for over 10 years, refining their data set and their use cases and their understanding of how law works. And they actually had 10,000 paying customers before they launched this new product called Co-Counsel. Co-Counsel just put them on a whole new trajectory and inflection point to almost tripling their revenue this year alone.
I think Casetext is a fascinating story of building a startup that feels like an overnight success, but actually they have been founded over 10 years ago. You started working with the company, sitting on the board for the past 6 years. What was that journey look like?
It was really fun. And so I started even before I was on the board. I had gotten to know Jake and the team at Casetext. I was a chemical engineer in my old life, but then I was also an attorney. And coincidentally, all of the board members at Casetext have been attorneys in past lives. And so when I got to know Casetext and their Series A, I really loved what they were doing. And this thesis that, the corpus of legal data is actually public in the public domain. So why are we paying, Thomson or Westlaw and Lexis so much money, right? And so, how do we take that on? And they started using AI back in 2013, right? So their real journey with AI began 10 years ago. And so for me, I started working with the founder. I actually helped them find an independent board member before I even came on board. He was a gentleman who helped with the go-to-market and led the go-to-market of another very successful legal startup. So I had him on the board, and then after he had landed a deal with my first legal employer, Quinn Emanuel, which is a very tough client. And when they signed a deal with Quinn Emanuel, that's when I knew they really had something. And so I came on board and led that Series B in 2017, actually. So we followed them for a few years and then have been on the board of Casetext ever since.
Yeah, what was that process since you sat on the board? Because I think for a lot of entrepreneurs coming from the high times of 2021, I feel like the rhythm of building a startup is you raise money, you burn the cash, and you keep raising, and you have to keep that growth rate high.
Right.
But now the math seems to be different in this cycle we're in.
Right. So this is a very unusual cycle. So I started in venture in 07, 08. And so I was in a startup before that, not to date myself too much, right? So I've seen many cycles. And so Casetext was the team at Casetext was very wise. They had been growing, year over year, very steadily, 15, 20% growth, and ended, 2021 or 2022 with that growth rate. And the company actually looked at, their trajectory and said, you know what, we want to own our own destiny. We don't want to have to go back to the market again, ever. And they had a whole plan to be cash flow positive by the end of this year and get there on their own oxygen, right? And I applaud founders that do that, especially in this market. They're really hard choices you have to make. And sometimes you have to say, hey, we're not going to grow quite as fast, but we're going to be independent and we're going to have options, right? So that's what Casetext did. They were very early in the sandbox with GPT-4, and they launched in March with this new product called Co-Counsel. And literally in 45 days, they racked up an additional $5 million of new ARR on their self-serve product alone. And so that really put them on a whole new trajectory. And then again, it's best to raise money when you don't really have to raise money. And so out of nowhere, they had, I think, 4 inbound term sheets. and then this very, very nice offer to buy the company. So that was also a hard decision. Do you keep going, or do you sell? And I have to be honest with you, Krystal. I was of the opinion of let's keep going, and let's see let's see where this goes. But it was a lot. It required a lot of very careful contemplation about what's in front of us, and what our options are. And quite frankly, we thought Thomson Reuters would be such a great partner to really realize the vision of Casetext. That was what won at the end of the day.
Yeah, that decision of deciding to keep going or to sell also represents, I think, a lot of questions in AI startup founders today. Do I partner with the big incumbents who already have the distribution channel and customers, or do I start scratch building what I consider as AI native companies? When you talk to a lot of the AI founders these days, what do you tell them? How do they build their moat?
I think that's the key question right now with AI. How do you build the moat, right? Because it's not a situation. I mean, I'm an engineer and a product person and marketing, so that's kind of my background, right? And we focus at Canvas at my venture firm very much on go-to-market and helping people really get their product out there and grow much faster. So in the case of Casetext, already having a 10,000 client install base to sell into was phenomenal, right? And it just supercharged them. With these new AI startups, if all you have is the model, it's really hard. You have to have something else, right? You have to have some kind of unique data set or a unique customer insight or use case that you truly understand. I look at other companies that were trying to start out in the legal space, and I know what we've been through for 10 years at Casetext, and I'm kind of like, good luck, right? Because it's a very tricky proposition to serve that client base and to gain street credibility. And so you asked, what advice I give. I mean, oftentimes, the best thing I think, I always say, well, what would I do if I worked in venture? What company would I start? I would consider some kind of partnership with a large company that has a massive amount of data and use cases that they've seen customers use for years, and those opportunities do exist out there, right? And I would consider some kind of partnership with them to build the company from day one.
I want to double click on the point you mentioned earlier through the journey of turning a high growth, cash burning startup into a cash flow positive business, because I feel like that's the message a lot of founders feel like have switched in the past 18 months from their VC investors. How are you helping your companies to get to that goal?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard turn, right? And so for many years now, we've lived in this environment where cash was almost free. Interest rates were, close to zero, right? And I have to tell you, when I started in venture, that was not at all the case. And we looked down and frowned upon any kind of venture debt, right? Because we really wanted companies to own their own destiny. And we joke it's called the loan-to-own model, right? And so you have to be really careful, when you choose your partner, and when you choose your debt partner in particular. So now, I mean, debt is much harder to come by. It's often not available at all, and if available, those covenants are pretty intense, right? And so, startup founders have to make a decision early. You can't wait until you have, 6 months of cash and then say, oh, now I'm going to cut burn. That doesn't work. You have to really look at it very early on. And what we help founders do, I mean, I kind of joke in a way that, we're half, investors and we're half therapists, right? Because a lot of it's a very emotional decision. You've been with a company for 5-10 years, and you have to look at it and say, you have to figure out a way to cut your burn by half. And if you do so, where you're going to be when you get to the other side. And companies that can do that, I've never had somebody say, I'm sorry I did it. I've only had people say, I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner, right? And so you have so many options if you can get your company to break even, and you have choices in front of you, right? Companies that just continue on this burn cycle will run into quite a few issues, I would say.
Yeah.
And companies too, like that have raised in the last 18 months with valuations that are high and maybe higher than what their burn multiple or what their valuation multiple kind of merits. Their challenge is maybe not get profitable, but earn the valuation you've achieved, right? And so that's a little different equation. And that equation, if you're sitting at a really high post-money of your last round, down rounds are not fun, right? And so you want to, even if you say, oh, I have, 18 months of runway, really think about where you're going to be when those 18 months are up, so where you've grown in and past your current valuation. And so what we do is we help companies with that calculus and help them sort of think through how to do it. And in other cases, there's one company I have in my portfolio in particular that took this medicine really early. They hit their numbers, launched a new product, and now they're off to the races and growing very quickly again. And so it's just sort of a little bit of a pause sometimes. And not everything is linear and up and to the right. You've got to think about the marathon, not the sprint. So
control your destiny and speed is the key message.
Control your destiny, yes.
You have invested through cycles. What are the benefits you're seeing founders started their company in a kind of a slow time like this in terms of capital of cost?
Yeah, so sort of the benefits of starting a company in a downturn. So when I started my career, I went to school at Berkeley, and I actually dug up an old presentation I had talking about how all these huge companies had actually started oftentimes in a downturn. So you look at Apple and Microsoft and IBM and even Disney, for goodness sake, and then you look now at WhatsApp and Uber and Slack and Airbnb, right? They were all started, in a very slow time. And there are a few benefits. I mean, one, a downturn is caused for some macro issue happening in the environment, right? And so in 08, 09, that was Lehman crashing and the debt markets, the banking seizing, right? And I did Lending Club in Q1 of 09 because the market just fundamentally shifted, right? And it created an opportunity for a company like Lending Club to get out the gate. And my thesis for that was that in any market cycle, there is a pocket of like super prime and prime borrowers that are credit worthy, and people want to lend because they're looking for a return. And by the way, the banks can't lend for at least 3 years. They're going to be frozen, right? And if any of you recall, 09, you had to put 30-40% down on a house at that point in time and have super prime credit to even get a loan. And so that market dislocation created the entire opportunity that was Lending Club, and that allowed it to be the largest U.S. tech IPO in 2014, right? Without that market dislocation, I don't think that would have happened. In fact, I could pretty much assure it. And so what we look for are these macro trends, like we're paid to see around the corners, right? So we embrace these market dislocations, right? Because what they do is they sort of freeze incumbents. All of a sudden, the incumbents have to just sort of deal with what's in-house, right? They have to clean that up. Oftentimes they're laying people off. They're cutting R&D. R&D is always the first budget to be cut at a large company. And so it actually creates a massive opportunity for a startup to come in and fill a need that incumbent will have when they wake back up, in 3 to 5 years and need to buy something, right? It's kind of how I see it. And then, and additionally, incumbents are laying people off, and there's just more opportunity to hire. And most importantly for me, the thing I really love is on the go-to-market. So, although I'm an engineer, I grew up at Procter & Gamble in brand marketing. I led acquisition marketing, and I had a company that's all we did was help people like Experian figure out their go-to-market. So what I really love in a downturn is how the channels for acquisition open up. So things that were once super expensive because you had 100 startups competing, for the same ad, in Facebook or Insta or, direct mail even, let's say, and more of incumbent companies. All of a sudden, those ad prices come way, way, way down, and it gives you a chance to go in and test so many other, channels that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And that's what I particularly love in the time of a downturn, because acquisition, no matter how great your product, acquisition is everything. So.
I noticed there are a lot of AI companies in your portfolio, but there seems to be zero crypto companies.
Zero crypto.
But I feel like if we were on the stage 2 years ago, that's all we talk about. Why is that?
I know. I was like this super uncool kid for so many years. So I grew up in fintech, right? I was actually the product person and marketing for the first, I'm going to really date myself here, for the first online credit card company, and we went public, back in the .com. So I'm well aware of, and we actually bought a bank, so we were also a bank. And we also got delisted and lost 98% of our value in one day. So I've seen it happen, right? And then, I live with Lending Club. So I invested in Lending Club in Q1 of '09. So the whole rhetoric behind crypto, you could have just copied and pasted the Lending Club Prosper rhetoric, right? Hey, we're not a security, which is a crock of shit, for being honest, right? We're not going to be regulated. We're not in that market. All not true, right? There's no way you can argue that crypto is not a security. And so I had invested in Lending Club in Q1 of '09. So they had just gone through being shut down by the SEC because they were indeed a security. They had gone through their quiet period and they had come back out the other side, right? That's when I invested because I'm like, okay, now we're off to the races, right? And so with crypto, I looked at it and I thought it was interesting, but, it didn't really meet the promise. Free rails, well, the rails really aren't free. There's these huge transaction costs on both sides. Anonymity, not really anonymous, right? I mean, the closest I got to investing was Chainalysis. And in terms of what all the promise of, and even security, it's not really secure as the Stanford professors showed us, right? And so I never really, jumped into it. We looked at many, many things, but I think having been in Lending Club, having been in financial services for a number of years, having been an attorney, although I was intrigued by it, we stayed clear of it.
Did you have FOMO back then?
I did, and I kept looking, and I would go and I would talk to these companies, and it's slower, by the way, so slower and more expensive, the whole bit, and so I did, and I would go and I would look and I would speak at conferences and I would talk to all the companies, and I kept thinking I was missing something, right? But it just took regulators longer than we thought it would to come in and step in and do something. And I'm actually shocked it took as long as it did. But that's sort of an adage in venture. You never invest when there's a window of time you have to jump through, because it will always slam on you at some point, right? And in this case, it stayed open, I think, much longer than we thought it would.
We have a lot of founders with us today. As an early stage investor, tell them what are your most interesting, what are you looking for?
What is the most interesting things?
Yes.
I always look for a founder to not only teach me something, but to sort of prove, I'll have sort of core tenets of this is what I believe, but prove me wrong. Because I love that, because then I learn something, and then I know, I'm like, gosh, you have a unique insight that I think is important. And then the most important thing about a founder is I want to know about them. I want to know about what is it about you and your fundamental kind of makeup that is going to enable you to get through the really hard times, and why are you doing this? And I'll spend a lot of time in that area, because it's not, this is not a relationship for months, it's a relationship for years. And so we really want to understand what is it that's the motivating force, so that we're always on the same side of the table.
That's Rebecca from Canvas Ventures. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.